Hello there, I'm Miranda and this is Take a Moment with NCH&C, the show where we talk to you and your colleagues about experiences that affect you. Listen on your drive between patients or in your downtime, whenever you get the chance to take a moment. In this special panel discussion episode, I speak to female colleagues from NCH&C about bias women experience in the workplace in support of International Women's Day.
Hello, I'm Carolyn Fowler and I'm the Director of Nursing Quality.
Hi, I'm Liz Cook. I'm the Director of HR and OD.
Hi, I'm Mercy and I'm the EDI Advisor for the Trust.
Hi, I'm Abby Adams-Orme and I'm the Staff Engagement and Communications Manager.
Hi, I'm Emma Lunny. I'm the Deputy Director of Finance.
I'm going to start us off with a question. In a study of performance reviews, what percentage of women received negative feedback on their personal style, such as "you can sometimes be abrasive"? And what percentage of men received the same type of feedback?
I would imagine that more women got that feedback than men did, but I'm not sure about the percentage. 30% of women and 10% of men? I don't know.
Ooh, I was going to go 66% of women and 45% of men.
Same here. I was definitely going to go higher, Liz.
Yeah, I'm a higher girl. No, I'm going to go. Okay, I'll go really high. 70% of women and 30% of men.
Well, funnily enough, Emma is bang on the money. 66% of women received that feedback and 1% of men.
No.
Yes. So that is
incredible.
It is a completely ridiculous statistic. 66% of women and 1% of men receive negative feedback on their personal style. So that really tells us something. And women face an awful lot of bias at work, particularly. There are many different types of bias. For example, maternal bias, which is a false assumption that if you have a family, that you couldn't possibly be any good at your job, and also that you're not going to show up for your job, basically. There's an interesting one called likability bias, which is where we expect men to be assertive because that's kind of just historically what we've been led to believe. So when they lead us, that feels really natural, whereas women are supposed to be soft and kind and communal. So when they lead us, that feels unnatural and we like them less. And these are all real sort of common statistics. So I'm really interested to talk to all of you about this. So have you experienced any kind of bias, like these types of bias, in the workplace?
I've not experienced it here. I think that's the first thing I need to say. I think the culture at NCH&C is very different. But the whole issue around presenteeism, and you've got to be there to be effective, and you've got to be there for very long hours to be effective. And I worked in an organisation where the men sort of used to commune around the photocopier about 5:30, and were very open that they weren't planning to go home until bath time was over, and that the kids were in bed or were nice and clean and shiny. They weren't actually working. They were just avoiding going home. And I had small children of my own at the time, and I would literally have to stop and go because the nursery shut at 5:30, and if I wasn't there, the kids were kind of thrown out on the street. So, it wasn't optional, and it was commented that I was always the first to leave a meeting. It was never commented that I managed my diary incredibly well because I was part-time and that I had a lot to get through and all of those things. And there was an awful lot of time wasting around banter and all of those things, which is sometimes really useful to engage with the team and to connect. But actually, if you're working to a very tight schedule, it just is not possible to do.
I was quite lucky in a previous role. I had a really fantastic marketing director who was a woman, and she used to really challenge people who were there at a certain lateness and walk around and be like, what are you working on? Is this something that could last till tomorrow? And some people were just sat on social media, just sort of making sure they were noticed.
Do you think people were doing that because they thought the promotion was only going to be available if they were the one who was staying late?
I think there was a fear of being the first to leave, as you say. I don't think people notice sometimes how early you get in, but I do think people notice how early you leave.
I think just going back to your question, Miranda, I was thinking about the bias, and I don't think I've probably really had it, but I have felt myself that it's there. So I think when I brought my children up, I definitely very much shared that with my husband. I was very lucky, but I never was late. I never missed a day. If the kids were ill, I always wanted him to take the day off because I had felt I had something to prove. But I don't think that's because anyone was telling me I had to. There was something inbuilt that made me think, as a woman, I've got to prove myself. So I'd be wrong to say people around me did that to me. I think it's something in me, being a working woman. And my children now would say, working mum, kids go to school whether they're half dead or not, just get there.
I completely agree with that sentiment, Carolyn. It's really interesting. So my son's 5 years old. Before motherhood, I definitely felt the pressure of wanting to succeed, and then motherhood snuck in between. And I'm like, well, just because I'm a mum doesn't mean that I can't achieve everything in the world that I wanted in the first place. And I'm going to show the world that being a mum doesn't mean that I'm not going to achieve everything. And I have found, though, what's really interesting is that in different sectors, there is different pressure. But yeah, I definitely think that, a bit like Carolyn, I've always had my own battles with myself in making sure that I have been achieving what I want to, what I'm setting out.
Emma, I'm really interested in your point of view because you're in a sort of typically male dominated world of finance. What is it like for you in that environment? Do you experience discrimination or bias?
So there are lots of men in the world of finance, and you only have to look around our own STP region to see all the directors of finance, CFOs are male. There's quite a good number of deputies who are female, though, so that's positive. And actually, it's not just within the NHS finance area. Also, when the people that we interact with, so the contracts, our financial services contracts with shared business services, our internal and external audit, quite often the people we're engaging with are very senior, very male people as well. So there is something about the world of finance that sees it dominated by men. Have I experienced bias? I can't lay my finger on it, which is a real positive. I think a bit like Carolyn, I am driven by by my own. I want to do well, and I want to keep all the balls in the air without dropping a single one at any point in time. And it is challenging. I've seen it. I've also seen it in the NHS actually, from the other perspective. So I have seen very senior female leaders who come across, or I have perceived as coming across, as overly confident. And there is a real fine line between being overconfident and perhaps being perceived as a bully. Actually, is that my own bias because I'm not used to seeing women, strong women, that way? Or is it their insecurity and dealing with the world of men? And actually, it's quite possibly a combination of all of those things. And we all have an unconscious bias. I think the biggest point is it doesn't matter whether you're a male or female, where you come from, what you do. It's about having empathy for others because your situation isn't the same as other people's.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I also have seen that. I have seen women who have not supported other women and who have been incredibly forthright and aggressive, thinking that that's the right way to behave and that's the way to get things done, and actually not recognizing that actually bringing a different skill set and a different thought process and a different approach actually creates a better and stronger team. I think the NHS did used to have quite a macho culture, and I don't mean that in terms of predominantly male. It was more around that sort of trying to be more like how they perceive commercial business to be. So it was lunches for wimps and all of that sort of stuff, where actually I think the skills that we bring around things like compassionate leadership actually would make us far better and stronger organizations. That there are ways of doing things, and I think creating our own culture rather than trying to be something that we're not actually makes us more successful.
I think you're absolutely right, Liz. I think one of the things I've really noticed at NCH&C is how authentic all of our senior female leaders are.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I wanted to work here was actually I felt I could be the leader that I wanted to be. And I have felt in other environments and other jobs that, I mean, I know women, we perceive them as being kind and nice, but actually that kindness, as long as it's a compassionate kindness, is absolutely what makes us good leaders. So I don't think we should shy away from the fact that if they are our natural instincts. And I know that probably a couple of jobs ago, I probably didn't fit in because I was seen as being too nice, and no one would give you the time to explore that if you're kind to people and you bring them with you and you're genuine, then actually you are going to lead, and things will change. And I think that's where I felt here. I can absolutely be, who I want to be.
Yeah, I think it's interesting just sort of listening to everyone talk. There's a lot of descriptions we put on women or words we'll use on women that maybe our male counterparts won't hear. I don't know if people have noticed of women will be called emotional and men will be called passionate, and men will be called assertive and women will be called bossy. And you're describing the same thing, but there's a definite negative connotation with the woman's description. And I feel like this starts very early on. And I have a 4-year-old niece who's just started school, and her teacher called her bossy. And my sister instantly challenged and said, no, she's just going to be a good leader one day. Because she was like, I can't imagine that you would ever tell a boy that he'd been bossy. But it's funny how it starts so early that that's put as a negative on women, when actually if it was a male, that'd probably be seen as quite a positive characteristic. And I think that kind of leads into what we perceive as leadership qualities of being good leader and assertive and emotionless and passionate. That's all great leadership qualities, and for some reason women don't often get categorized with those descriptions.
I think it's so sad that men can't be emotional. To like, I'm probably the most emotional person going, and I really enjoy that. I appreciate that because I know it drives me throughout my day. I know that I care about my work and I want to do really well. And if I didn't care, if I was emotionless, then I wouldn't do a good job. We should be mentoring each other and nurturing each other so that we can become leaders, so that our daughters aren't called bossy in the classroom and they're called the future leaders. I don't understand why, in this day and age, we're still talking like this.
Yeah, so I think we're not saying all men are like it, and we're not saying all women are like it. Obviously, we're talking in broad generalizations. However, for me, it's about encouraging conversation. So it's back to the empathy, it's back to the understanding. And just because, whether it's a man or a woman, doesn't show emotion, doesn't mean we're not feeling it inside. And I think being awareness of our sort of our Myers-Briggs types, whether you're extroverted or introverted, there's a lot. We're all complex. We're all individual. There's a lot going on. And we're not all the same, and that's brilliant because that's what makes the world go round, and that's why as a team we do a lot better job than as if you were working by yourself as an individual. But it's about how do you have those conversations. I'm not sure that we have those, or that we're brave enough always to have those conversations, and perhaps especially between men and women, it's sometimes more difficult if you don't have that likeness for somebody or shared understanding of or shared knowledge of that person. It's sometimes quite difficult to break down those barriers and really get to the nub of what's going on for that individual.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. It's made me think really. I do think we have a responsibility ourselves to not be passive in this. And it's not always about being a man or a woman. It's about being an individual, isn't it? And we've got a set of values and a way we behave. I don't think that Mercy could possibly be the most emotional person because that has to be me. And I fought for many years to manage getting upset. I manage my emotions by actually crying. That's how it affects me. I have a good cry and then I can move on and I'll be fine. So I've fought to hide it, to bottle it, and almost just growing up now at the end of my career, really, to think, do you know what? It is who I am. And actually, what I need to do is help people understand that and articulate that and not be frightened of it. And I would say, in the team, my colleagues, the exec group I have now, they're getting to know me quite well and they respond well. But actually it's for me also to have those conversations, a bit like Emma says, and and be honest. And also, when people say, oh, how are you, and you say, well, I'm fine, because I know if I don't say that, I am going to burst into tears or something, and I don't want anyone to see me crying. Well, why not? Why not? And I've had a couple of incidents in the last couple of years where it's been really, really tough, and I've been talking to a group of staff, one I won't ever forget, and talking about what it was going to be like in the pandemic, how it's going to get better, and what we were going to have to face. And I got very emotional and couldn't continue talking. And my first reaction was to be embarrassed. But actually, the impact of that and the feedback I got from everyone going, "Oh my goodness, you're human," that gives us permission now to show how hard it is. And a bit like Mercy was saying, I care. And that was my way of showing I care, I guess, and people heard it. And so I think, I've learned a lot in the 2 years. This 2 years has been, as for all of us, and a lot about myself. But I think we have to not be passive in that role as a woman, and have those dialogues, really.
For some people, it's just not the norm. So they're not used to seeing a woman crying at work. Therefore, they don't know what to do about it. So they panic and they think it's a sign of weakness or whatever it is they think. But I heard what someone say once, that if something's funny, you wouldn't stifle a laugh. So if something's sad, why do you stifle a cry? It's ridiculous, isn't it? It's still an outpouring of emotion. It should be fine either way. So International Women's Day have put out a pack of bias fundamentals and how you can sort of challenge them. So this is what you were saying, Emma and Carolyn, about how we can't be passive. For example, there's a slide about a meeting dynamic. So if you're in a meeting and a female colleague is spoken over or interrupted, it talks about why it matters that that has happened and then what you can do. So, for example, you can say, I'd like to hear the rest of her thoughts, or, Emma raised an important point. I'd like to consider it further before we move on. So you can, whether you are male or female, you can draw the conversation back without saying, hang on a minute, you talked over her and that's gender bias. You can, draw the conversation back, get that person's views heard. And if you're leading a meeting, you can reduce interruptions by following the agenda, asking people to contribute in a structured way. You might say, let's go around and get everyone's ideas. There's ways that you can do it. And the reason that this kind of bias happens is because people tend to value women's contributions less than men's. That is all rooted in something called attribution bias. So for me, that's like a fundamental of not being passive. Let's be in those meetings, see that kind of thing happen, and jump on it immediately with the right language.
We've talked a lot about work and motherhood and the balance, and I'm not a mother, I don't have children, but I feel like I can, at the end of the day, I can sort of stand up and go, I've done my hours and I'm going to go home to my dogs and my book and my husband. And now I don't have the family responsibilities, but that doesn't make my personal life any less important to be able to leave. That doesn't mean I should be the only one staying because I don't have children to get to. And I think there's that kind of understanding of everybody's life outside of work is really important, and work shouldn't be the most important thing in your life for the entirety of your career. As you say, that can go up and down depending on where you are, but that's okay. We're allowed to have different priorities, and we're allowed for it to not be work sometimes.
I think that's a really good point, Abby. So I'm interested to talk a little bit about the gender pay gap, because we've had a recent report out. Basically, we know that within NCH&C, there are more females in the organisation by headcount than males. However, males have a higher average hourly rate due to a larger proportion in higher banded roles in comparison. So that just goes to show that we have more men in senior roles, in a female dominated organisation. What more can we be doing to get women into leadership roles, do you think?
I think we talked about flexible working, and I think we've done a lot of work around that, but I still think we've got a way to go. I've actually had someone approach me today for flexible working, and they sort of come tentatively and giving me lots of reasons why. And actually, you don't need to tell me why. You are telling me you want to do something different, you want a different way of managing your work-life balance. And so I think it's beginning to happen. I think for women particularly, it is probably important because we still have a lot of women as carers, not just mothers, but as carers. We do have men as carers as well, and we probably have more than we realise. So, I think whatever we do will help both genders, because I think that where you find there's a bias one way with one gender, there's a bias another way with another. So it's sort of working at both. So I think flexible working would help everybody, and I think also we need to encourage men to use flexible working and see it as an okay thing to do. But I mean, I work a 9-day fortnight. I don't know how many people know that. It's very unusual for a director to do that. but I think it's the right thing for me, and it keeps that balance. And I'm no less committed for doing it. I'm proud to be able to do it. So, and I have many of my staff now, a lot of my team are now working flexibly. But I think it's partly that role modeling of, I think this is a good way to go.
Yeah, I think Emma hit on it in terms of I think we could do more around job share. I do, and I think the finance team are really good at it actually. So I think it's something that we ought to consider more widely. Also, that talent management conversation that we need to develop and grow on in terms of, you make decisions where you are in your life, and it might not be the right decision for you now, but what can we do to help you in the next couple of years when your life might be slightly different, and how can we set you on that path? What development do you need? What experience do you need? How can we expose you to those wider things? And also having that conversation around it's not as scary as you think it is. So I think most of us, if we talked about how we got to this role, it was by default rather than design often. But it is that whole thing around actually it's not as scary as you think it is. So it's about how do we expose you? How do we share our experience with you? How do we get you to come and have a look? Try before you buy sort of stuff. So I think there's a lot more we could do to demystify what it's like to do, and that it is possible. You can do it.
We suffer a lot with imposter syndrome, lack of confidence, the fact that we as women, not necessarily whether we're mothers or whatever, we feel like we have to sacrifice something to get to that leadership role. It's just work. A lot of the times we're doing the work before we're even given the job title. And so we just need to literally put ourselves out there and say, I deserve that job title. I deserve that wage.
Yeah, so just back with the gender pay gap, I think there are broadly two key reasons why. Your example of people consistently on the same band, men being on a higher rate than the women, I think one of those reasons is, generally speaking, and historically this has been more the case, that women are the ones who tend to take periods of absence from work, carers leave, unpaid leave, maternity leave, whatever those reasons are, and so we have missed out on the opportunity, firstly, but we've also, when you do come back, you tend to come back at a lower level, and then you have to work your way up the pay points. And then the second point, following really nicely on from what Mercy was saying, is actually, generally speaking, women lack the confidence of going for those opportunities, those promotional opportunities. And what's the harm of going for it, and not getting it? It's all good experience. But we tend to wait until almost we're tapped on the shoulder, or we've almost done the job before we feel in ourselves we can actually do it, before then applying. And I think that slows us down compared to men who don't generally think that deeply, that they are much more naturally confident and will just go for it.
A few years ago, I read an article which said if a man sees a job description, they will apply for it if they only meet 60% of the criteria, and women will only apply for it if they meet 100% of the criteria. And after I read that, any time I saw job opportunities, I had that in my head. And whereas I was looking at the negative going, I haven't done that, I thought, no, I'm going to apply because I know I could do it if given the chance. And I know I've done most of the things. And having that kind of statistic in the back of my head has made me go for so many more opportunities than I may have before.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with all that, but I think I think Emma said it earlier on, it is a generalization. And I think it's important to just remember that, because I'm married to a man who would be like the woman in like, oh, I can't do that. So, not everyone is the same. And I think it's how we support all individuals really to reach their potential and find a way of looking at a job description, saying, do you know what? I love that. And actually, I'm going to show my passion for it and my ability to do it. I might not have in my toolbox everything at the moment. So I think that is something we could do for our female staff if we're talking about the gender pay gap. Actually, that encouragement, you could do this. Actually, it's possible. You feel like saying to them, well, I've done this, I've got here, so anyone can. Come on, you feel that. And I wonder underneath whether we talk about things like the imposter syndrome, whereas actually it is perhaps with others or with our male colleagues, but they don't talk about it. So I'm not sure that the talking about it and the really feeling it, I think, are two different things. So what we see is maybe not always what's there.
So HR is a predominantly female profession, and the thing that makes me crosser than anything is when HR is described as fluffy. In come the people to do the fluffy stuff. Changing culture is incredibly difficult. Managing people is really challenging. If it was easy, people would do it better. So it is that whole thing around I don't care what your gender is. I want you to be a talented individual, and also understand what it is you're coming into and the range of skills that are needed. So if we go back to our conversation about what people select on job descriptions, is actually you need a range of skills for most jobs, and it is about kind of recognizing where your shortfalls are, and maybe that's the thing, is we're more honest about our shortfalls, which isn't a bad thing. It is about really going into a job and understanding what your developmental needs are, and then the organization recognizing and doing it.
I think it's really great that things like the gender pay gap report are published, because I think it does open those conversations. I think it makes it quite transparent. I think Liz mentioned we're doing a lot of things, I think, at this trust, which is important to know. I think we've got really great kind of flexible working opportunities. There could be more. I think we do need to advertise more job sharing, but we do initiatives like the reverse mentoring scheme, which I think is really important for things like this. And we've got great leadership programs. So I don't want people thinking it's all doom and gloom. I think we're making really great strides. It's just important to keep stepping forward.
I would agree with that, and what I'd really want is to people to be able to think there's someone they can go and talk to if they're thinking about the next step in their development. There's people like us who have some life experience to bear that hopefully are seen as approachable, and people can say, I heard that was interesting, I'd like to talk to you more about it.
We have careers champions, we have the staff networks. Like, there's no reason not to speak to anybody. And I believe, I'm not sure, I might be making this up, but I'm sure I've heard this, but you can have like an on the floor day, like you say, but go out with some of the clinicians when they're going out to people's homes and see what their experience is like. You don't have to take the biggest leap and say, I'm going to apply for a job. If you want to see what it's like for the day, have the conversation with somebody. I'm sure people are willing to say, yeah, you can come and shadow me for the day, for the hour, see what it's like. Come to this meeting.
I'd like to echo those points. If anybody ever wants to have a chat to me, open virtual door policy. I'd always be happy to talk to anyone about career options, or even actually, we've talked a lot today about how well NCH&C do, but what we're not saying is we couldn't do better in some areas, and it's not everybody's experience. And I think actually experiences are very down to the team that you work in and the way that's led and managed. So, if there are points for learning, we are here to listen, most importantly, and to hear suggestions. So I'd always welcome that.
I think we'd all be happy, wouldn't we, to talk to anyone about career opportunities. I know I did yesterday speak to somebody, and I just like to say I like being a woman in NCH&C. It feels like a good environment. It feels like a supportive environment.
Thank you for listening to Take a Moment with NCH&C. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please visit the podcast intranet page to leave a comment and for details of our other episodes. You can also follow NCH&C on all social media channels.